And we're live. Good
All
morning.
right. Hello,
Good morning.
everybody.
How y'all doing?
It's great. Let's start with some introductions for those who haven't tuned in before. I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director of the Center for Prophetic Imagination in Minneapolis, and pass it to you, Dan.
Yeah, and I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing, and we're really excited today. We've got a great guest with us, Reverend Gregory Bentley, and who's down in Huntsville, Alabama. It's just I'm thrilled that you're here, Greg. Greg is one of my living teachers, and
Likewise.
and also is there we go. He's back. Presbyterian pastor, as I said, in Huntsville, and also, and I'm super excited about this. Greg and another elder in our church, Alana Street Stewart, are running for the moderators of the General Assembly for the PCUSA. And for those of you that are not Presbyterian government nerds, that basically is kind of the Presbyterian equivalent of the Pope. Only we elect him and we kick him out after 2 years.
Right. No lifetime appointment.
Does it come with a special hat? You get the Pope gets a hat.
we have to come up with one.
Yeah. So but the moderator. So for 2 years, the moderator is kind of the main teaching voice of the church, and so I'm just really excited that they put their hats in the ring. And then that Greg is here today. So, Greg, why don't you introduce yourself, say whatever you'd like to about your background, and then kind of kick off our conversation about what this pandemic is looking like from your perspective. And we'll go from there.
Well, thanks, guys, for having me on here.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be on here to kind of chop it up and have this type of medium. To be able to, in spite of the distance between us physically, be able to connect with one another. It's amazing. Greg Bentley, pastor of Fellowship Presbyterian Church in Huntsville, Alabama, and the president of the local chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as well. And, like the rest of us, we're just kind of press on in the midst of this pandemic. In fact, today we have food distribution, as we do every month at what we affectionately call the ship. And, that I'm really proud of that ministry. You have a lot of people who are invested and involved in that. And we thought it that it's even more important to continue with that in light of the challenge of the present time, with so many people already being behind the 8 ball. Our people didn't even flinch. They were like, Rev, we understand all the social distancing stuff and stay at home and shelter in place and all that, but we're not going to not do this ministry. So that's not even an option. I'm like, well, I'm with y'all. In fact, as soon as I get off here, we'll be going over there. And for the most part, it seems like my folk are faring well. They're hunkered down and pressing on. And in fact, I posted something this morning to my Facebook page about how an already extravagantly generous congregation is even more so now. I mean, it has really intensified. We're really proud of my people. Proud to be their pastor. How they're stepping up. Yeah,
that's awesome. And maybe we could kind of start there, because that's something I know that you have talked about a lot. You and I have talked about some. This divide between the people that can shelter in place and sometimes get kind of righteous about that.
Yeah.
And then the reality of, hey, if you don't have food at home, like, you got to go find the food, and somebody's got to go give you the food.
Plain and simple.
And so again, I mean, what's that like from your perspective on a large scale? I mean, is this something the pandemic is making clearer, sort of revealing more a lot of these kinds of divides?
Yeah, I think the pandemic is the crisis that is revealing the crisis we were already in. It is it's exacerbating and intensifying the crisis of the normality that we already had. So when I hear people say we need to return to normal, I laugh because normal was already jacked up.
Yeah.
So we need to find a new normal, and we need to really have the moral imagination to begin to envision what does the normal we need to look like. Right? Other than just, kind of hankering and pining for, the status quo ante. What does going forward look like? How do we go forward to create a better society for everybody, especially the most vulnerable among us?
Yeah.
That's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you could share that image we were talking about before we came on live.
Oh yeah. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is when he says that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And, my thought is that it does if you get enough people up on it to bend it down. And so you need enough people climbing up on that thing, bend it toward justice. Justice is down here, and the arc is up here. So if we get enough people up on top of that thing, what does that look like? What does that process look like of getting enough people up on the arc to bend it toward justice? And what is justice? I think we have to flesh that out, because our national imagination about justice is so malformed by criminal justice that we can't even think in the biblical notion of justice, of distribution and restorative justice. So there has to be a whole consciousness shift away from punitiveness to restorativeness in the conversation.
Yeah, it's sometimes it seems like the talking points that even come from seemingly progressive folks doesn't sound that different than "Make America Great Again."
Right.
It's like
we just have a different. It's just a slightly nuanced difference in what that means. I think we have to have something fundamentally different in what we're trying to do. The project itself has to change.
Yeah, the reason that I love that image so much when you came up with that a few minutes ago is because that's a quote that you hear all the time, for example, in white progressive churches, right? I mean, I love to quote that, because it sounds hopeful, it sounds kind of cool. But it is as if that is going to happen spontaneously, right? Like we can just kind of kick back, and eventually God will bend the arc, and that'll be nice.
The myth of inevitability, if we can just keep on trucking, keep on doing what we've been doing, and it'll eventually bend down.
Right.
Because, as if it doesn't require any effort or involvement or investment on our part. And that's the fallacy of it, that progress is not inevitable. Progress is intentional. It has to do with what we decide to do.
Right.
It's always God's desire that justice be done, but God in God's infinite wisdom has decided to partner with us, and we have a role to play in that, and whether or not that becomes a reality.
Yeah. Yeah, so I know one of having some internet issues here today. So
you're coming through nice and clear on my end now.
Yeah. Okay. So you wear a lot of different hats, and one of the other hats that you have been wearing is as the one of the co-chairs of Bernie Sanders' campaign in Alabama.
Yes.
And so we've obviously had a lot of conversations about the issue of healthcare over the last number of months. So say a few things about how you feel like that particular issue is being exposed as far as this pandemic and as far as the policy discussions that have gone on. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that this pandemic is pushing the fact that we need a universal health care kind of solution.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, COVID-19 has done what no other debate or evidence or data could have done. If you can deny the necessity of Medicare for all now, then there's nothing else that can be said. there's no argument. There's nothing that can convince you that, and then some people will take the position, they go to the extreme and say, well, look at Italy. They have universal health care, and look at the people who died there. Nobody's saying that people wouldn't die. We're just saying that we would be better prepared to deal with something like that had we had Medicare for all in place.
Yeah. Which would include, public health systems, right? That obviously we have been sorely lacking in the midst of this. And so, we want to, as always, encourage. We've got some folks on here that are saying hi and responding. So we want to encourage you to jump on in with your questions and comments. And when those get on, we'll throw those up there. Obviously, one of the things, one of the biggest issues, as you said, exposing the normal that was already there, that the pandemic has done, has to do with, with the incredible inequalities in our society, right? And so Black communities all over the country are being hit way harder, disproportionately harder by this pandemic, of course, as a result of systemic racism and years and decades of health inequalities related to that. So maybe you could say a few things just about that and some things you're hearing and conversations you're having with people around the country.
Well, people in my circle, we knew that it was going to hit Black folks harder because of the systemic nature of inequality in our society. I mean, America is not incidentally or accidentally racist. It is foundationally and fundamentally racist. The only way you could not see that is for you to be oblivious to that fact. But what we do, we tend to personalize these as characterological defects. Black folks just need to, wash their hands more. They need to, just all this silliness and while totally ignoring the systemic and structural aspect of how these disparities were put in place over time. Right? And that's not to negate or deny personal responsibility. It's just saying that doesn't begin to explain why these things are.
Right.
Right.
So, if Serena Williams can almost die having a baby because doctors won't listen to the fact that she's got some kind of complications and problems after that because, she's a Black woman who's just complaining. Again, like you say, I don't know what sort of things get people to wake up. But, you just see these incidents all around and examples of exactly what you're talking about.
And the data is voluminous. I mean, how, Black people are discriminated against in not just the healthcare field, but in every aspect of American society. I mean, even when it comes to pain, Black folks can say they're hurting. Oh, you will be all right. This is the data. It's voluminous. Right. This is not, just anecdotal, us talking to one another. I'm talking about this is documented. Right. So it's that barrier that we have to cross too, just to get folks to take what Black folks are saying seriously.
I'm gonna throw up a comment real quick. There's a few coming in. Colin writes, paging Joe Biden regarding Medicare for all. I can hardly contain my rage at his unwillingness to consider it. I mean, this is one of the questions, like we were talking about before. If we get the Democrat in office, we're going to still need a lot of people jumping on that arc.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, even people that should know better seemingly don't. There's an obliviousness on all sorts of levels. And we can't just sit back and assume like, well, at least it's better than Trump. Like that seems to be kind of where a lot of people are at.
No bar to say not Trump. I mean, yes, not Trump, no question about it. But is that all we want? Is that all we think we deserve? Not Trump. I mean, what is it that that we want? What is it that we want to actively put in place to make our reality work for everybody, especially, as I said, the most vulnerable among us? And not Trump is woefully insufficient to get there. It's good, it's right, but it's woefully inadequate.
Right. Yeah.
Here's a comment from Zaries. I think the pandemic is exposing the punitive and carceration mentality in many people, and even how to enforce public health guidelines. I've heard of stories of, Black, Indigenous, people of color, essential workers in San Diego being pulled over by cops for violating shelter in place.
There you go.
It's this intensification of like, who are we going to blame? Let's blame the people we always blame, but more.
Exactly. When these people are not out lollygagging, they're working. You just said it right there. They're essential workers. So you're penalizing them for trying to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unduly punitive.
Yeah. Well, and all the, I've seen many conversations about, Black folks and people of color saying, there's no way I'm going out on the street with a mask on my face. Right, like that's just asking to get shot, to get pulled over, to get arrested. Right. And so then, as you said, it's that double whammy. Like, not only are you the ones that have to work, but then, to keep yourself safe, it's already going to be twisted into some kind of criminal behavior.
I just read something the other day about how Instacart shoppers are being lured in with these, generous tips. And then they go and they make the groceries and take them in, and the tip is gone because Instacart allows people to adjust that. And these are in, well-off, affluent communities. I mean, how vile is that?
Yeah.
I mean, people who could easily, it's not like, they couldn't do it. It's just spiteful and vindictive to do that. While yet blaming these people for being out.
Yep.
In fact, someone has to make that sandwich. Somebody has to go and get, the best thing we can do for essential workers is to pay them.
Right.
Like all this, well, thank you for your service. That doesn't amount to a hill of beans. When it gets at the end of the month, I need money to pay rent, to make groceries, to take care of, my basic needs and the basic needs of my family. So, what we engage in a lot of times is what Dr. James Forbes calls pornographic patriotism. And what he means by that is, it's that patriotism where we wear, the flag lapel pins and we give people lip service. But when it comes time to providing for their material and emotional and spiritual needs, we're missing in action, Yeah. Even though there's a lot of foreign policy of our nation that I disagree with, but the soldiers, the men and women that we send abroad to fight and they get boogered up doing so, we have a duty to take care of them for the rest of their lives. It's sacred for us to do that. That's a non-negotiable for me. That's apart from the policy that put them in harm's way. I'm talking about the person. Right. You can oppose policy while at the same time keeping track of the person's needs and our duty to provide that. Since they didn't send themselves, they were sent by government policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example of what you're talking about, and there've been some, kind of cartoons or pictures of this where you've got the person sheltering in place up on the balcony, clapping for the street sweeper. Right. But then it's like, then when you come and say, oh, we need to have a $15 an hour minimum wage, like, oh, no.
Oh, the hell with that.
We can't do that.
Exactly. As if their applause is enough.
Right.
No. Like the rapper JT Money said, the way you show me your love is by the way you pay me. I mean, pay folk. I mean, this is not a hard thing to understand. This is not rocket science. If people are as important as you say they are, and if you value them as much as you say you do, then pay them.
Yeah.
Amen.
It's just that simple.
Yeah. We've got a couple of other comments here.
Yeah, I'll throw them up here. This one's from Colin again. Individuating the causes of illness, mental or physical, is the national pastime. Mark Fisher argues that effectively in capitalist realism. It's just we love boiling things down to the individual. It's like it's individual's fault. Yeah. Right.
Well, it's interesting, because if you had all these financial gurus who have drummed into us over decades, you need to have 6 months' salary squirreled away. And then after less than 6 weeks, you have these multi-billion-dollar corporations coming with hat in hand saying, make us whole. Wait a minute. So you're telling individuals who are making $30,000 a year that they should have the financial wherewithal and savvy to have 6 months' salary saved up, but multi-billion corporations can get relief after less than 6 weeks. It's crazy, man. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Kathleen's pointing out another good issue we could say a few things about. Voter suppression. Yeah. Oh,
well, we know a little something about that. I mean, this is a great American pastime. The real, I think it was it Frankfurter or Brandeis? I can't remember which Supreme Court justice it was. They said we can have democracy, or we can have unfettered capitalism, but we can't have both.
That's right.
That oligarchy is diametrically opposed to democracy. And oligarchs, they really can't stand democracy. They can't stand, democratization of the voting process, of the ballot, of the franchise. So voter suppression is a necessary component of an oligarchy. You see that, you don't have democracy working. You have something working.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to the intentional nature of America, right? I mean, when America started out, it wasn't like there was universal suffrage.
Right. right.
I mean,
not even all white men.
Right. Exactly.
Franchise. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, voter suppression is, again, it's kind of written into the DNA of the country, right? So propertied white men were the only people that could vote.
Right.
So again, it's taken a lot of people jumping on that arc to try to bend it towards that. And, I mean, what's amazing to me is that, there are a lot of people in the Republican Party that they don't even have any shame about saying, we need to suppress the votes. Like if everybody could vote, we're in trouble.
Well, I mean, they're, like you said, they don't try to hide it. I mean, that's they say it quite openly because the impulse, and it's deeply rooted, as I said, in the foundation of the country, to have this be a white settler nation. What we're pushing for is democratization, to move beyond. Trying to turn my phone off here. Ringing. I just let it ring out. We're pushing for democratization, not a concentration of the founding impulse of the country. So in many ways, we're swimming against the founding tide of the country. That's what makes it so resilient, that it keeps coming back. Even when you beat it back a little bit, it keeps coming back. But those who are committed to democracy and democratization have to just keep coming and keep building up a critical mass of people who can get up on that arc till it really starts to touch down at justice.
Right. Maybe Mark.
Here's a comment from Colin. Just to jump on that, with the evident necessity of national vote by mail, what do we make of gutting the United States Postal Service regarding suppression?
Well, I think a part of that is just there are some people who don't believe we should have any common public space. If it were left up
That's
to
right.
them, they would privatize everything. You would have to pay to ride out here on the interstate if it were left up to them. They just don't believe that there should be anything that's basically government. I mean, just the bare bones stuff, right? Everything else should really be controlled by the private sector. So that's a worldview. That's an ideology. That's war right there.
Right.
Yeah. Then and so except for socialism for corporations.
Right.
Oh well. No question about it. I mean, that's what we're seeing now. I mean, anytime they get jammed up, they're coming to the public till. And I'm not saying there aren't cases where we shouldn't do that, but it should come with some reciprocity. And it shouldn't just be a free gift, but with the understanding that you have to invest in the common and the public good. And we should be just as concerned about the well-being of the people as we do about as we are about corporations and about systems. Because at the end of the day, for me, it's all about the well-being of the people and how these systems and structures and entities function to facilitate that.
It's amazing to me how many people can kind of get twisted logic with. So corporations getting bailed out makes sense because, trickle down theory, right?
Well,
So it's like this authoritarianism, but then it's under the guise of like somehow it helps the individual. That's the most helpful thing you can do for the individual.
Well, there's no evidence. There's no data to back that up, that trickle down works. I mean, we keep falling for that, man. I mean, trickle up works. If it does. If you make people whole, that this will trickle back up through these various systems and entities and corporations and structures that you are plowing all this money into. Because if you make sure that people have the money that they need to take care of their basic needs, they got to spend it with somebody. They have to buy food, they have to pay rent, they have to make mortgages, they have to make car notes. So this is really not rocket science. I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination. This is just common sense.
Yeah. Well, and being in Huntsville, you know about rocket science right down there.
Oh yeah. That's a whole other conversation, and how actually the Nazis were treated better who were brought here than black folks who had been here for generations. So we could have another segment on that.
Oh, could you say a couple things about that?
Well, Von, and I just recently found out that it's Von Brown, like the color brown. We have been saying Von Braun. And he was a Nazi scientist. I mean, but America wanted access to that at that time, which was a cutting edge technology. And they rolled out the red carpet for them to come here when folks who had been here for generations were, treated like, third-class citizens. Right.
And for those of you that are not aware, sorry, go ahead. You finish.
No, you go ahead, man.
No, I was just going to say, for people who are listening and watching who are not aware, Huntsville is the center, has the National Rocket Center there.
Yes.
Big space center and some very cool stuff. But this is a really fascinating part of the history that I'm sure a lot of people don't know too much about.
Yeah, it is, and the legacy is still with us. There was an Apple TV special called Hunters. Came on recently. Al Pacino played this Jewish man who led up this team of Nazi hunters. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I won't give it away. It's fascinating to watch that.
Okay, great.
Von Braun plays a critical role in one of the episodes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. So a great recommendation there. And so we're coming to the end of our time. If anybody else has another comment or question here, please throw that up. And I guess, Greg, maybe if you could just say a couple things. I mean, if you could wave your magic wand and get folks to do a couple of things in terms of some of this movement work that you've been talking about. I mean, what are a few things that you really see are kind of very much at the forefront or salient activities for folks to get engaged with right now?
One is to vote. I mean, I hear people all the time say, "Well, voting doesn't matter." Well, if it didn't matter, why did the enemies of voting lynch and fire people and threaten and coerce? I mean, that's just silly. That voting doesn't matter. It's not a panacea, of course, but it does matter. I was so proud to see the Black folks in Milwaukee come out in spite of the Supreme Court order. They thought it would suppress the vote, but they actually came out in mass to vote. So I see a new spirit of defiance and resistance is growing. People are realizing that it's do or die. That the forces of death and destruction and empire are unyielding, and they're relentless, and we have to be just as relentless and unyielding in resisting and opposing them to bring about the type of reality that would be life-giving and life-sustaining. A shift in consciousness has to take place. We can't act differently until we start to think differently. That there's just some things we got to be purged of and just get to the point where people matter more than systems. We talked about before we went live, this GOP congressman saying that, it is more important to preserve the American way of life than it is to preserve American lives. That's an ideology, and it's a deeply held conviction of a lot of folk. That they think so little of themselves, they'll rather preserve a system than to preserve their own lives, or to let millions of others perish. That's going to take a shift in consciousness, a shift in thinking and how we view one another. It's going to take solidarity. It's going to take us really connecting across all of the lines of divisions that empire likes to use to keep us separated. It's going to take us pulling together and piling up on that ark, and to the point that it really begins to let justice flow down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. But I believe we can do it.
All right, beautiful. Yeah, thank you. We do have one question here for you, Greg. Does Reverend Bentley have a blog or a website? I know you're extremely active on Facebook. That's one of the best places to connect with you. Or are there other good places?
No, I don't have a blog, but you know what? I think that's something I need to do.
There we go.
Now's a good time to start.
Yeah. Actually, I call myself, an extroverted introvert. I do this stuff because, you have to connect with folk. But if it were just left to me, I could just not be on this at all. I could spend my whole weekend. So I have to really push myself to connect in this kind of way.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate it. And so thanks to everybody for your comments and listening. And again, Greg, thank you so much for coming on. This has really been a blessing.
Oh, likewise. Man, thank y'all, and keep on keeping on.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man. Y'all take care.
Yeah.
All right.